And okay, I'm recording also. It's going to be a standoff. Who will grab the mic?
Hey everyone, welcome to the next Chief Delegates meeting, number 22. We are missing John because of stupid daylight savings time. And but today we are going to go over our individual updates. We will continue with our proposed changes for the next set of Chief Delegates. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit about the Fireside Chat yesterday. And so let's kick it off with Lovejoy.
Hey everybody, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Show them what you're drinking.
For what it's worth, yeah, I've got a little bit of Ireland's finest here, single malt from the Dingle Peninsula. Just starting early, you know, don't blame me. A lot of pressure. Yeah, let's see here. We've been, I guess, as far as like direct Eden stuff, apart from contemplating the changes that we're making or contemplating making some meta contemplative stuff that's going on with Eden. I'm just about to pull the trigger on 300 EOS donation to Eden CN, which is the Chinese community is about to fire up their first test election in a couple days here. And so that's pretty exciting. Chris, I don't know if you got that yours already in the works or not, but
no, so I'll follow your lead. Let me know what account you're sending to, because I'm also sending 300.
Cool. And other than that, yeah, just ENF life keeping me busy, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. Aaron, would you like to go next?
Sure, why not? Account creations moving along. I created my first account, my first test account through unicove.com using the Android version. I'm being very specific because that's the test path we're on right now. And it worked great. So pretty excited about being able to release this. We've published one NPM package related to account creation so far. It lets you from any website click create account, and it pops up this little window and walks you through the flow and gets you to get a wallet if you need a wallet, and then goes through the creation and all that fun stuff, and then drops you back into wherever you were just at. So good onboarding flow for EOS applications. Still that barrier of a payment that exists that we can work on addressing as time goes on if free alternatives exist. But it's something where the user doesn't have to leave whatever app they're on to go create an account and get lost somewhere else in other documentation and whatnot. So it is coming together. Code reviews are still going on. We've isolated the code we need from our Android version to support desktop and iOS. And we're waiting to do that until we're just confident enough with the Android build, and then we'll continue along the path and hopefully have something in the not too distant future for other applications to try out. So that's where our account creation flow is at.
Aaron, I have a quick question.
Sure.
This is kind of random, but I'm defecting to Linux at some point. Is it, are you going to support Linux, or is that just like you can use the Clio if you want to use Linux? Or
Anchor works on Linux.
okay.
There aren't as many Linux users, so you may run into things that maybe nobody else has ever run into before. But I know the ledger support's not as great on Linux, and in some versions of Linux it might not even work. But you should at least be able to download it and do basic things. And yeah, so as we rework the whole desktop application, which is on our roadmap, but we have not even started it yet. We're hoping to get better support on that side. So
Cool, because I hear this is the year of the Linux desktop. So
Cool. Randall.
Yeah. So we're basically doing the same things that we've been doing. We're able to have our first big meeting with the squad and the agents. It was pretty good. A lot of people showed up, except for maybe few that had emergencies that they couldn't participate, but it went well. And we brought some people from outside world. They are not part of EOS, that now we are trying to help get them familiar with EOS and EOS support. So it's pretty cool. We're also working on our platform, still working aggressively. I think now we are on, we are building the inside development for the online courses, so that hopefully we can provide courses and give certifications. So we just transitioned to that a couple of days ago, and we will have like a ability to also have video. So hopefully that will help with tutorials. What else?
How's the polling thing going?
Yeah, still working on voting integration and whatnot. So we are still working hard, and I started working on a proposal that I want to send to the ENF to see if they like it. I think Aaron, I sent you a copy for you to look at. So see how that is, and then we go from there. Pretty much.
Randall, where are you guys at with the referral system? Were you able to start it, or is this a little
No,
bit more
I
down
didn't
the road?
start it. I'm going to be very honest with you. Sorry about that. But it's something that I want to do, but I wanted to get a couple of things done, at least cleaned out, so that we can have the EOS support platform up, because the platform that we have right now is just like something just to put out there. So eventually we want to have the real platform with all the right designs and everything up. So I'm trying to get that ready. And so, but we will start. I'm hoping maybe next week or next 2 weeks, hopefully we should start working on that. The one thing that my developer told me that is going to be taking a lot of time is the algorithm, right? The Bitcoin algorithm. That's the only thing. So once we start, hopefully we will finish pretty quickly, maybe in a month or so. So it shouldn't take us too long.
Okay, yeah, and if your developer has any advice to make it easier or simpler, like, yeah, totally.
He has an advice, but I was like, you know what? We have to make Jesse happy.
No,
So,
I'll be happy. It's just, yeah, I don't know. I tried to.
But we can come up with something, and I can show you if you like it. Then we go from there. All right.
Yeah, so we're talking about the referral and onboarding system that we're going to be on Pomelo. That's going to be a grant on Pomelo, and it's got a part in it that the reward goes down if more people get onboarded in a weekly period. And so as long as like the reward goes down if more people get onboarded in a period, like I think that's the most important thing. So how that actually gets done, I personally don't care so much. And like I'm not a developer, I'm not a math guy, so there's probably an easier way. And so yeah. Chris, last but not least. Oh no, actually, you're not last. I'm last. But go ahead, Chris.
Right. Yeah, let's see. Not much this week on the myvoteos.com campaign. Still looking, I'll be talking with Han. He'll hopefully be on our live stream on Friday, well, tomorrow. And so talking about that and the intentions and objectives and what we're the best case scenario, what can come out of that. I can't recall if on the last week we were talking about the Upbit and the hopeful relationship and the size of their cold wallet. Were we talking about that last week?
I don't think so.
No? Yeah. All right. Well, it's 158 million EOS now in their cold wallet. That's a lot. So it's tricky in terms of they're not voting. So those are tokens, those are EOS tokens that are sitting on an exchange that are not being voted right now. And so the intention is that Upbit will direct those tokens. And this is where it gets tricky, whether it looks like they're looking to have their customers opt in. So, which is reasonable. I think that's actually what a lot of exchanges should be doing with their customers, other than just saying it's in the terms and conditions that we can do whatever we want with your tokens. It should be an explicit opt-in, but to each their own and how they feel about that ethically. The intention with Upbit, though, is they probably do the opt-in approach. The downside, of course, is it doesn't allow those tokens to be immediately voted, because if they were, that would be a whole lot of swing VP movement. If they were all of a sudden directed, if 158 million tokens were directed towards a collection of BPs that have agreed to this pledge to not buy, sell, or trade votes, then that would really shake up the top 21, most certainly. So yeah, that's still an intention, and we're working towards it. It's slow, of course, as everything is, but anyway, we'll hopefully keep pushing along there and make something happen of that. At least just putting those tokens to work in delegated proof of stake seems sort of the point. So there's not a lot. If you look right now at blocks.io, the top 21 BP only has 183 million votes. Like, if you think there's over 1 billion tokens, like there's this shit participation as far as token holders go. So yeah. Again, to many, this is not a problem. Blocks are being made. I shouldn't be wasting anyone's time talking about it. I understand that. I'm just an individual, and to me it matters. I mean, whatever. So I think I'm excited about the idea of getting more participation, getting more people involved. And where are all these tokens that aren't being voted? Well, it's pretty clear, actually. There's no return, right? There's no incentive to vote, because there's no return. Rex has no return for anybody. And so hopefully the Yield Plus group, that hasn't come out yet, but I'm very optimistic that they'll hopefully have something in there that points towards yield. But anyway, I'm also going to be working on a summary, sort of a expose of sorts, looking into BPs. That'll be something I will deliver before the end of this term, and it will be a look at where votes are going and sort of a little snapshot on sock puppets, which it's pretty neat. It's pretty funny, actually, the more you look at it. So anyway, yeah, that's my update there.
Thanks, Chris. I think it'll be really interesting to see the percentage of people who opt in. I know that there's many other companies who use opt-in type services, and so that'll be super interesting. Can't wait to see that.
To put a positive light on the opt-in is that if we were to have a sudden shift and the BPs that were shifted in weren't ready, like that could be could cause problems on the network. So maybe to take a positive note of this gradual buildup is that like it'll allow for more stability as any changes take place. So +1 in that column, although despite, going from 0 to 100 is always exciting,
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's funny. When I looked at the math, and if I added Brock Pierce's proxy to that, it's actually just enough tokens to replace 15 of 21 BPs, which would be too much too soon. But yeah, and I think also with the my Voteos proxy, if for whatever reason Upbit said, actually no, we're going to pump it all, we're going to point it all towards your proxy, we would know in advance. So we would coordinate certainly with the BPs that have signed on and say, okay, get ready, make sure your info is ready. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's no intention of some grand coup or whatever, right? But once you get 15 of 21, you can change the rules. And I think there are a few rules that are worth considering looking at, making standard. Like, I think again, I've talked about this in chats before, people seem to not want to hear about, but what Telos has done, and they've done two things that I think are pretty obvious and simple. One of them is rotating standby BPs into production to kind of cut away the sock puppets. If you're going to sit and stand by and collect pay, you should have something. And if you don't, you should get deregged and you get kicked. And right now you can't be identified as a standby BP for not having anything. So that's an easy fix. That's obviously working on Telos. They're doing it. And the other one is to remove once you're in the top 21, so standby pay should be all the same and the top 21 should be all the same. Telos does that. They're doing it successfully. One of the advantages of that and the outcome would be less incentive to buy votes. I guess you could argue that that's actually fine and they should be able to buy votes and they can, but if the incentive is removed and it's still, blocks are still produced and it's still functional, why have this staggered pay between right now, the top EP whose new dex gets 996.8 EOS a day and the 21st ZB gets 801. So by just smoothing that out, once you're in the top 21, you have no more incentive to buy votes. So it does kind of remove that incentive to want to do that.
Or at least less incentive. I mean, you may still have incentive to get into the top 21.
That's right. It won't eliminate it. It's a reduction of incentive. You got it. Yeah.
It will, that second point will limit the number of BPs that can be paid though. That's one thing I think that Telos has, is they don't have as many BPs because of that flat structure where they're paid equally. It's just based on the budget itself. So there are pros and cons to that as well. Some people towards the bottom may drop out of pay if that were adopted.
Yeah, interesting points. I'll go next for my update. So we finished the last translation into Vietnamese that came out this week. I did a couple of interviews. We're getting ready for Pomelo, basically. We've got, the bees have 2 grants that we're getting ready and writing and translating. And last week was super busy. So this week's a little bit more of a cool down. And yeah, just kind of getting ready for Pomelo and yeah, hopefully we have a great, another great Pomelo season. And just want to thank the Pomelo team. I know the funds for Pomelo for the bees were very critical for us to grow as an organization. And very thankful to have that opportunity to get some more funds again. All right, so that's the end of our updates. Chris, I'm going to give it to you. Do you have permission to share your screen?
I can make that happen.
See.
Who will let me share my screen?
So guys, we have more things to look at for our total proposal by the end of our term. We're going to be looking at bylaws and some things in the peace treaty today. And then eventually at the end of our term, we're going to come out with a full document of all of the changes that we're proposing as the first chief delegates.
Yeah. So yeah, where we are at, the things in green are things that we previously sort of agreed to, basically. Things in blue are some items that I have been thinking about over the past week. And then there's Chuck, I put some of his in blue as well. And anyone watching this is an open doc. It's in the Eden members group. And we'll share it or make sure it's pinned, I guess. And if anyone wants to add any other ideas to here, whether there's addition, like, so we've got categories, but then the item itself, just add rows. Like don't hesitate to, and don't delete it all on us, but add rows. Okay, so the first one in blue is this, the actual active permission keys of the Eden Genesis.Eden account. John before was talking about ejecting, which is the term, I suppose, that he was using to have the chief delegates take over those active permissions, which currently reside with the Clarion team. So it's just basically a matter of formalizing in a bylaw what our powers are and how they work. So my suggestion here is, as part of the election process, the winning chief delegates will have their Eden account keys replace the current active keys. Threshold of 2/3 + 1 required for account transactions. So how that's done, it could be manual. Like if we don't have to necessarily codify this. If the current chief delegates just have to sign over to the next set of chief delegates, I think that would work. Ideally it's codified, but I'm just saying in terms of just kludging through it to make it work. As far as a written comment. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I support this one. But I guess in general, for our voting today, there's only 4 of us on the call right now. And what do you guys think? Just write our votes, and then on our DM Telegram, we can get the rest of the votes.
I wouldn't even vote. I don't think we should vote on any of this necessarily. Like, I think what we could do is maybe take this worksheet and then summarize it in a comprehensive singular document, and then vote on that. Because we should hopefully, as we've gone through this, agree on everything that's gone into it anyway. So it should be something we'd all agree on as it is.
Yeah, but we need to agree before it goes on that comprehensive document.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, that's right. Yeah.
And all right,
see your
so,
point.
but so we'll do the votes here, and then we'll try to get Randall and John to comment on it after the call if they can't make it. So this first one, I support row E5.
You know, I just want to interject really quick. It's about 22 minutes to the hour when ostensibly John will show up, and I suppose Randall will come back at some point. So perhaps we should do this in reverse order and talk about ƒractally now. And then when we're all present, we can go over the proposed changes.
Good
Does
idea.
that make more sense?
Good idea. Yep.
Sometimes I have good ideas,
All the time, man. All the time.
especially when I have the luck of the Irish with me.
You're drinking green whiskey.
That's right. It's not green. It's
I
a
know.
nice amber color.
I'm just
So
kidding, but-
I wanted to take this opportunity to ask Aaron a couple questions. So I think we all listened to the Fireside Chat yesterday when Dan came on, and I just like want to know, like I just want like a refresher, I guess. And so from what I understand right now, and this is regarding the system changes. So from my perspective, the main impasse right now are these system changes, and which ones are opt-in. I remember there was a few opt-in. I know, Aaron, you don't like the account name. So can you, Aaron, just review all the system changes and which ones are opt-in and which ones maybe that you have a problem with?
And also, were you on the Fireside Chat yesterday, Aaron?
Yeah, I was listening.
Okay. So, you know the
I was trying not to take
responses.
up airtime during that. So, yeah, the account name I think is one. I talked to Dan a couple of weeks ago, just on a one-on-one over the weekend, and he said that that one is flexible on. It could improve the user experience. Is his justification, which I think is, there's pros and cons to both sides. But it seems like that one is completely optional and not required at this point. It could offer benefit, and it's going to come with baggage and things that need to be done. From, I guess, to kind of back up just a little bit, all of the contracts I think are opt-in in some sense. It's a matter of when users opt into those things, how well are they going to be supported? You know, if you start using this new token contract, if you can only use it in one application, that's not great. One of the things that on our side that we've always pushed for is like, if you can do something with our software, well, you should be able to do it without it too, because we don't want you to be dependent on us. So like, we could develop Anchor features that are opt-in as well, but then we kind of lock you into Anchor, and that's something that we have avoided at all costs doing. The one exception to that kind of being our recovery sheets, but even then you can still extract your keys and just choose not to use that. Anyways, I think the big one is probably the token contract, which again would be opt-in, and the ability to exchange between tokens. So that way you could move to and from various tokens and various token contracts. Those, I think, and this is just going based on my understanding of how ƒractally operates, are the two absolute requirements that just need to exist. From Dan's side of things.
Wait, sorry,
We've
two?
also-
You have the token. I thought it was just, you're talking about the token.
the token and the exchange feature I think that's technically a separate thing in the
Oh,
way it's
okay.
been outlined. So you could make the case that they're the same thing, but I guess when I was saying it right there, I just meant those two things. So, I think the only reason that it comes down to the token thing being required is that ƒractally doesn't want to run their own token contract, because that probably puts legal liabilities on them. Whereas if the BPs were running it, that mitigates that because it's a system thing. So at the technical level, none of it is required. And this could all be done without system contracts. Like, that is technical requirements. Regulatory and like ƒractally requirements, I think that for them, it may be a requirement that somebody else runs these contracts because they don't want to take that burden on themselves. There are some things in the blue papers that are also that way. It's a logical requirement if you were going to be doing these things, because, you know, you might be willing to build something, but you don't want to take on the legal liability of being the operator of that thing. So when we're talking about requirements, those are kind of the two flip sides of it. The NFT standard is not actually a system contract. That's, I think, maybe the fourth thing I'm mentioning now. That's more of just a standard way of building things. What else was there in the list?
Well, I have
Honestly, that's all I can. Do you have
So-
a list?
no, I just have a question, a follow-up
Oh,
question.
sure.
So is it accurate to say that what you were talking about with the token and exchange system contract, that it also needs to be like usable for other dApps? That requires some continued development. And is there a concern that there won't be continued development from the ƒractally team? Is that a valid concern?
I think so. Yeah. For me, it's a valid concern. I don't want to see something built and then unsupported. Like that would lead somebody else to have to manage that in the future. And if that is going to be the case, then we just need to address that concern by making sure we have resources to continue developing that thing moving forward. We don't want to just drop something and then nobody is capable or willing of supporting that moving forward, especially when it comes to the integration in other applications and making sure that like exchanges can support this thing and applications can support this thing. So yeah, valid concern.
And I'm not sure, but for the ƒractally team, the incentive to continue that development for other entities in the ecosystem, it doesn't feel like a strong incentive to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think like when we see that price tag of like, this is what it costs to build this thing, we need to clarify that it's like, okay, this is just the MVP, this is just the first version, and that's all they're willing to do. And then we need to, as a community, come up with what it costs to maintain moving forward and account for that before we commit to the initial thing. Because we, like, for the chain, we need to make sure that we have like a 5-year roadmap for this thing. And if we're just talking about this 6-month chunk, then it's up to us to figure out what the rest of the 4.5 years looks like.
Right. So the chain needs to really want it, because
Yeah.
the chain is going to be paying for the long-term development of this feature.
Yep.
Got it.
Are there other
No.
upsides besides ƒractally that the chain would consider as like, you know, worthwhile reasons to back these different changes besides ƒractally? Or is it just kind of like a problem, a solution looking for a problem?
Could be. I don't know. With the developers I've interacted with, I'm not in the smart contract world, so my opinion's probably not the most weighty on any of this, but I don't see people saying I need an easier way to deploy a token. Like, that's just not a problem that people come to me with. I'm not saying it's not a problem and other people wouldn't gain benefit from something like the token contract, but I think we need people to come forward and be like, yeah, I would use that token contract to deploy my token and like justify that the network is going to take on this thing. Right now we have one application, ๊ractally, that is like, we want to create thousands of tokens. We see a lot of value in this thing. But are there other applications that feel that same way? Can they step forward and say, yeah, I don't want to manage my own token contract and this thing would really help me?
That's a good angle for the ๊ractally team to potentially take, is to be like, these are the changes that we need for our application. These are the benefits that we see they would provide for other contract developers on EOS. If you feel similarly, like, you should speak up now and voice your support.
Yeah, and support our proposals essentially. And that's what I was doing in the call before this, in the EOS.io Plus call, is I was like pitching an idea from the Wallet Plus paper saying like, hey, here's something we think would benefit all of you. Here's the plan to make it happen. Like, does this make your lives easier? Because we are coming at these projects from the public goods angle. We don't have a specific product we're building that needs these SDKs. Instead, we've just worked with hundreds of developers over the last couple of years who we've seen have these problems. And now we're presenting a solution. And it's really easy for all those developers in the past to be like, yeah, that actually would solve my problem. And hopefully over the coming weeks, it's just released today, developers will point at some of these proposals and say, yeah, that would really help me. So to turn that back around on ๊ractally, that's, if they really want other developers to support these initiatives, they need to propose it in a way that's not about ๊ractally specifically. It's almost like if you were doing a Pomelo pitch and Daniel Keys comes back and he's like, you need to focus on the public good angle of your product and present it that way. But I think that would probably get more reception so long as the ideas were helpful to other people. So yeah, in general, I think that would be a better approach. But I mean, we're at the point now where Dan has said, like, I'm not going to build these things. Somebody else please build them. And I think we really need somebody who would get benefit from those things to step forward and be like, yeah, that would benefit me too. Maybe I'll do it.
So Dan came on our call, Chief Delegate call number 19 at the end of the video, if you guys want to check it out. I remember him describing the token and exchange thing, that it would be a central registry for tokens. And one of the values of that would be when you're on your Blocks account and you see claim your voice token. I think he said like those type of things would be a lot harder to do or would not happen anymore if there was a central token registry, and it'd be a lot more secure and safer. So the benefit to developers would just be a safer and more secure token for their DApp. Is that accurate?
It's a really optimistic point of view. That is assuming that nobody uses anything except for this token contract, which I don't think is a valid assumption. I don't, like on Blocks, when you see those things, I don't think those are going to just magically go away and those phishing attempts are going to stop, because Blocks isn't going to hide any token that's not on this token standard. And that's, I mean, you could also use this token standard to make fake tokens and do the same thing. So I don't see this being a solution to the phishing problem that exists, which is undeniably a problem. We probably get users every couple weeks who come to us that have suffered from those like scams, and they lost their account. They followed the instructions and it stole their account. It's not a good situation, but ultimately I don't see the token contract solving that. It might lead us towards a solution, but deploying this isn't going to fix it.
Yeah, I think he also said something about account creation costs and how there's a more efficient use of RAM.
That's
And
for the
so-
new account system, which,
Oh, that's for the new account system. Okay.
yeah, honestly, I mean, if it costs you, I'm just going to make up numbers. If it costs you 50 cents to make an account now, it's going to cost 49 cents. It's not like some grand savings because of the
Okay.
account name system. It is a huge lift to be able to actually implement that system for minimal cost savings, which might add up if we have like 100 million accounts on the network. But right now, we're optimizing prematurely.
Got it. There was something else that Dan had said during the Fireside Chat that I thought was interesting, like to get your guys' perspective on it. He had suggested that these things that he needs for ƒractally can be built on another chain. And I was thinking to myself, okay, what would that look like? And I kind of ran to a brick wall in my head. Like, what other chain could he do this on? Like, I don't really understand. Do you guys have any thoughts on that comment that Dan made?
Wouldn't it have to be another EOSIO chain? I mean, he said something about layer 0. Like EOS could be layer 0 for this sort of fractal governance consensus process. So
Yeah, but
I'm
he
presuming that
needs a system changes on EOS, which he
He
said he
does
wasn't
need
going to build
to-
anymore.
Well, actually, in that call, he said that he needed funding in order to not, have only his skin in the game. Like he wanted funding. So he did kind of reiterate a desire for funding.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't know if it was an explicit ask, but he expressed the idea that he didn't want to be like footing the bill for everything if the network wasn't going to like then adopt it. Which makes sense. On a certain level. But yeah, bringing it back to your original question. I don't know.
Maybe there'll be a Mendel chain after all.
I mean, there could, but I don't see Dan ever launching a chain again. Like, I think that he is in the spotlight in terms of regulatory issues enough that he may propose a chain be launched and then have a set of block producers launch a new chain or something.
You'd have to, have somebody else do it.
Yeah.
I don't even know if
so-
he can.
Yeah, it'd be a real tough situation for him. I mean, I've thought about that a couple times. I was like, why doesn't he just use the EOS snapshot? And it's like, well, the people who paid for the EOS snapshot technically would be getting rewarded then, and then that kind of really gets into securities issues. So I don't know what a Mandel chain looks like, and it wouldn't have to be an EOSIO chain, I don't think. I mean,
Why not?
you could do it on any other blockchain. Like, I think EOSIO is uniquely positioned in that we have some pretty powerful smart contracts, but I don't see why. I mean, he's using spreadsheets right now. Why couldn't he do this on any other smart contract platform? Like, that's a viable option. I think his barrier is finding somebody that's willing to dump money into it regularly. Like, which chain is willing to provide meaningful inflation to actually make this token worth something? And
I don't know. There's some reason he wants to. I think there's some reason he wants to deploy on EOS, because otherwise, like if Dan wanted to, he could have already been moving forward on some other chain. Like he has offers for. I mean, he could have offers for funding if he wanted to.
from where?
I have a friend who is the like a VC person who is basically like, I love what Dan's doing, and we'd love to talk. So I
It's
know
not about funding the project, it's about funding the fractals. That's the part that I think is like EOS,
there are
I
other
think may be the best
blockchains.
shot,
There are other blockchains that are potentially interested, I think,
potentially.
but there's some reason I think that Dan is
So I can change this.
hoping it's EOS and wants the EOS community to. Now I don't know why that is. I mean, apart from the obvious reasons that we could all
Yeah.
speculate about. I thought
Tough situation.
I thought that Jay Taylor made some actually pretty good he made a lot of sense to me yesterday in the Fireside Chat when he was talking about using Eden as a vehicle for Fractally, and talking about a soft fork type approach, like if need be. I don't know what that ends up looking like, and our tenure is almost over here, and for many of us, but it does seem like Fractally needs like a midwife, essentially. And I don't know, like he was talking about a vehicle and using this bullish analogy, which was kind of a little odd in a sense, but I think Fractally needs somebody or some group of people that can kind of help it, get, it's in an awkward middle phase right now. Like it's like one party wants total commitment and the other party is like, yeah, but we need to know that, we need assurances, essentially. Like you want commitment, but we want assurances, and we want to know that there's like real value here and not just smoke and mirrors. And Dan still has clout in the sense that he's who he is, but yeah, I think there needs to be like a middle road, and I don't know what that is, but I have a degree of faith in the Eden members and other people in the community to find that middle path and kind of continue to go down that road, but I don't know what it looks like from here.
That conversation yesterday was interesting, but I think Jay and Zach were kind of talking on two different levels and kind of going past each other. I don't think Eden is in a position right now to be what Jay wanted it to be. In order for it to serve that role, Eden needs to elect leadership, because that's what Zach was looking for, is like, who's going to lead this, who's going to lead the transition, who's going to form the first thing. And right now, Eden, as we are all like, we have some leadership, but it's not formalized. And Eden at this point is primarily a funding mechanism with limited funding. So it's hard. Like in the future, Eden might be able to be that thing, but we would need to like flip Eden on its head and say, like, okay, Eden is like a process to elect leadership now and is no longer to create value. Like obviously electing leaders is a form of creating value, but I think that the way that Eden is set up now, it's to go out and disperse funds to create value. That would be concentrating funds to create value in leadership. So it's a hard one. And while they were talking about that, I was almost like, well, maybe they should spin up a second Eden. Maybe it should be like an Eden for Fractally or something. And it is literally an Eden process to elect leadership to help lead Fractally towards EOS. I don't know what that looks like, but
yeah, that is interesting. I mean, the Fractally group has set up a fractal for EOS. So that would be like a matching pair, essentially. It'd be like two groups moving towards each other instead of just one group, instead of like a asymmetrical sort of.
So
Yeah.
the thing is, one thing that became clear to me when Dan did the Helios interview was that ƒractally requires invitation. And the invitation, the person that's bringing someone on board, that person has to make sure that the person that they are bringing on board has certain skills and integrity, right? So they believe that ƒractally was just going to spin up, let's say, an application on EOS and people would just come for money. That's not how I was seeing it when Dan was describing it, right? Because he made a statement that if this process is being run by monkeys, then we're gonna have a monkey do, right? We're gonna have a system that doesn't operate well, right? So we have to still have people with integrity, some smarts who can get together to run processes and pick projects that are bringing the most value to, I would say, to the blockchain, right? So it just boils down to what we are doing right now as Eden, right? The people who are gathering or going through the process have to be people who are willing to dedicate themselves to be transparent and to do what they said they were going to do. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to solve? Right? If we want consensus building, as long as we can gather people and get the right people to reach a consensus, that's all that it is. So the Fibonacci sequence doesn't really change that. It's the people, and the people have to believe in the system. So if we are going to really think about a system that we are going to use to elect Black producers and do all these fancy things that will bring value, we have to think about a system where we get to elect or pick or bring forth the best minds, right? So, because I was thinking, I was like, is Aaron going to make it to every meeting, or Aaron and his team make it to every meeting? The people with the most money, the most value, and the most skills, they will not do it.
Aaron's made it to every one of our meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just what, 45 minutes, and I know that after a couple of months, I'm gone. I'm not doing this
much to his chagrin, yeah.
Yeah, for a lifetime. You know?
Yeah.
Randall, this is a lifetime appointment, didn't you know?
And the way that ƒractally set up is that in order to maximize value, everyone on your team has to show up for that. Like, it wouldn't just be me showing up to represent a team. Dan a couple times has said that, you know, like one person on a team could represent the team. And that, while that is true, like if I was representing a team of 10, I would be getting 1/10 of what I could be getting if my whole team participated. And those numbers aren't correct necessarily because of the Fibonacci and the way it all lines up. But the point being is that in order to get the maximum value, your entire team has to participate constantly, as opposed to this, where I literally am the only one and I'm getting the same amount now through Eden. And I am representing my team through Eden right now. So
although you did just kind of touch on an interesting point, which I hadn't considered before, which is like, if Aaron, if you show up and you are a team of 10 people and you're the only one that shows up, or someone else from your team shows up, it's like the group that they end up in almost have to put them at the top spot. Because you're like, look, I represent gray mass. And they're like, oh, well, I guess we'll all be like 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 now, because how can any individual contributor compete with like the sole representative of gray mass?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if there's a way to know that you're the sole representative of a team, but
No, he just says it in the
would look-
meeting.
It
I'm
would
the only
look
one on my
right.
team.
I know, but verify, like,
Yeah, who's checking?
but
No one's
well,
checking.
I mean, over time it would be pretty obvious. Like if like every one of Aaron's team showed up and said, "I'm the sole representative of Gray Mass.
Right.
You
Right.
have to vote me at number 1 or 6 or
And
whatever."
also
Yeah.
another thing is if you spend, let's say $20,000 building something, right? Then now, you are putting a risk that you are hoping that risk is going to be mitigated by you getting compensated for the meeting. But how many people can do that? How many people can put 20,000, 30,000 to provide a value and get compensated for it if they go to the meeting? Or if, let's say, they don't get compensated in one meeting, they hope that the next meeting, maybe they might get compensated, right? So then now you have to hope or assume, I would say, that everyone who is going to be part of this meeting has enough money.
Trust.
Enough money to provide value and get compensated, right? Or they have enough credit to borrow money to provide a value that the community is going to like. Because the community can say,
point.
we don't like this crap, and then you are screwed, right? So all those things have to be factored into a process like this. Because this process is a difficult process, because anytime when you have to build first before you get money,
Yeah.
it comes with a lot of risk.
You actually bring up another interesting point, which is there a loan mechanism in this? Like, is there a loan possibility within the DeFi that is being proposed? Because we don't have a lot of details about what that, at least I don't recall a lot of details about what the DeFi would allow. But if loaning was an option and the community had a pool that it could loan from for people that provided like outsized sort of like value, that might be a way to get around exactly the problem that you're talking about. But this is neither here nor there. It's kind of way out there.
I want to respond to something that Randall said. Randall, when you were talking about how you need to invite people, but there's money on the line. And I think what you were trying to get at was like the free rider problem, where people are just coming just for the money.
Oh, of course. Mhm.
And they're not putting in thought into how to actually, like, they're going to be the bottom spot, but still, even in the number 1 spot or the bottom spot, they need to put in thought and they need to know about the EOS community to see who's the highest contributor.
Mhm.
And if you're guaranteeing money for the bottom spot, you could come against the free rider problem. And in the last Saturday call, I believe Douglas Buntner was trying to articulate this problem, and you could not come to consensus. Like if the free rider, I mean, well, no, the free rider will just go with whatever the other people want to do just to get the money.
Mhm.
And so it's not a unique perspective for these people. So it's actually, never mind, it's not really what Douglas, I don't think, was doing. But that's certainly an issue that I don't think anyone has brought up. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, because if we are trying to get the best minds that are going to help the network and provide some sort of value for governance and elect good VPs, and also have a little bit of inflation to do what they are doing, right? Then we need to invite quality, well thoughtful, trusted members. We can't just allow anyone to just come in.
And I think that's why Eden goes the other way.
Yeah,
You have to pay to come in.
Yeah.
But isn't that a function of teams? Like, you're not going to want people on your team. It's like any multiplayer game when you have teams. Like, you don't really want people on your teams that are not going to be, producing or creating value. for your team.
Right. And the
And
teams
so-
select the VPs. So I don't think the
I-
free rider problem affects the selection of VPs, but go ahead, Lovejoy.
Yeah, essentially that. Yeah, like yeah, I feel like teams are just, I feel like social functions kind of weed out the free rider problem. And then, you know, if somebody is a total free rider and all they do is show up every week and take last spot and vote, like it's kind of a public service. So it's
It
not
becomes
really
a
free
UBI.
rider.
They're gonna have a ton of people potentially show up, and
That's right.
they're gonna do sweet fuck all except for show up. And you might end up with like 3 or 4 of them who don't do anything other than show up, and they're gonna be in the same group, and they're like, yeah, cha-ching, I did less nothing than you did nothing. So rank
But-
me higher.
But don't you think it like serves a function also of like, you know, like if people show up every week and they're not total wastrels, they'll eventually be like, huh, I could contribute, like I have something, or they'll get bored and leave. You know what I mean? Like you're either gonna like,
Yeah, it's the
You
quality
gotta
of
pay.
contribution, though. I just feel like that you're going to get, yeah, they might contribute, but what? And it's exactly to Randall's point. What quality of individuals is this system going to magnetize? Who's going to be drawn to this to want to do quality work because they're talented people and have this uncertainty of not getting paid? That's
it's
it.
the uncertainty factor is what.
That's not a
what kind of-
lure for a lot of people who are quality.
And I,
Yeah, I mean,
just
most
for-
people are. Sorry, I'm just sort of wanted to build on what Chris was saying. Like most people are used to that guaranteed income. Like I get a job, I know I'm making this amount for like this amount of effort. It's not like a lottery, and that's a little disconcerting sometimes for people. What were you gonna say, Aaron?
I was just gonna say, as we're talking about these things, I would completely leave out the BP selection portion of it because there are bigger questions that need to be answered, especially in relation to language. We can't just have a single language electing VPs for a global network. Like if we're gonna replace DPoS, we need to solve the language barrier, like through processes or through technology or through whatever it is.
Yeah,
Because right now, the one thing DPoS has going for it is that your tokens have value, and that value is universal regardless of what language you speak. So using that to elect block producers is not impaired by it. It's not as impaired by language. But fractally, the fractal process right now is very limited by language, and we can't like until we get to the point where we have some grand thing that can bridge languages, like these systems can't do BP selection. We can use them to pay people and like do this UBI thing, but like there's a bigger looming problem than anything we're talking about in regards to BP selection. And that also applies to Eden because we're in English Eden right now. And if we want Eden to select VPs, then we need like the Eden of Edens that are representing all the languages. Then we need to figure out how those subgroups communicate and make decisions. It'll probably be slower and a lot more process intense because we all need to communicate. But that was just my thought as we were talking about like picking VPs. I was like, how about we just set that idea aside? It's a good one. Like I'm all for exploring ideas to replace DPoS, but like let's focus on the distribution of value for value creation, essentially. It just makes the conversation easier, and then I don't get derailed thinking about why that wouldn't work.
I don't know why Dan included that. I really wish he should have. I really wish he had separated this of his initial ask. It was just way too much up front. And I think personally, my view on the idea that Fractally would select 11 BPs and DPoS would select 10, there's nothing elegant about that. That is a very kludgy, forced way to try to impose this other method. That doesn't solve for Pareto capture. It just throws it all. And like, there's no like, if anything, it made sense to me to maybe do this like the OIG and WAX, where you could have Fractally have this trusted organization vet BPs and form a relationship that could be like multilingual because you'd have translators, and then have like a filter to remove these shitty sock pup. Not that sock pups are shitty, but they don't add a lot of value. So like go through it like that and then have DPoS select from there. That to me would have made more sense. I don't know why he went for this just we pick half.
My
Yeah.
takeaway from yesterday was actually that he wanted that because he wants ƒractally to make sure that the chain will continue to support ƒractally. It wasn't so much about solving DPoS. It was just like self-preservation of ƒractally. He
Well,
point blank
fair
said,
enough.
and these weren't his exact words yesterday, but that the chain that ƒractally runs on should embrace ƒractally. And I think that was a nod to that. But yeah, I agree with you. It's too big of an ask. It doesn't make sense.
But hold on, ƒractally is a for-profit. So even though they are creating a public good, they still charge you to provide that
The
good.
other broken bit, right? That's the whole
Yeah.
thing. This is supposed to be a public good thing. What? Yeah. How exactly does that for-profit part fit in there? Because that seems like a bit of a contradiction.
Well, they're hosting services. I don't know too much about it, but I wanted to go back to what Aaron was saying about the languages. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I kind of did a very not super thought through proposal on one of our calls. I do think that there's a process out there. So Aaron, you said maybe there's a process to include all the languages. I do think there's one out there. And I do intend on writing a more thought out way to potentially do that. Because I've always thought this, so Dan said this in the Helios call. So the challenge with he recognized the challenge. The challenge is what Aaron was saying. You can have one prime fractal or multiple. And I think it's got to be multiple, but there needs to be a process that's lined out and the community can agree on. And so that's something I'm kind of interested in working on in the future.
it'll have to be like its own unique thing. I mean, we do this on VP calls right now, and they take arguably twice as long, if not longer, because like I will say something and then I need to stop, and then the translator needs to repeat that thing in another language, and then the other language needs to talk while the translator's taking notes, and then when they're done talking, like the translator then repeats it back in English. So it's like it takes 3 times as long, and that governing process of multi-language is probably not going to be a mirror of what happens in a single language, but that still needs to be defined until the point in time where like I can speak English and it subtitles what I'm saying to the viewers who don't speak English. Like that would be amazing, but how about we invent that technology?
But I mean, why does anyone think that we need to create a technology better than what the United Nations has been using and all these other global international organizations have been using for generations now, which is multiple people communicating in their respective languages and having a translator between them? I mean, it's not rocket science. It's actually jobs for the network, and it would create more communication between all the parties. I think I don't really see the problem.
Fees are here, guys. If you want to use us,
to be honest,
we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah,
Well,
and
it's a
we
function
have the
that needs to
bees.
be paid for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thing that I was thinking about is that, we have a blockchain, and blockchain is supposed to allow for grassroots organizations to build consensus and eventually to create some sort of wealth amongst people across the globe. Okay, we shouldn't lose the focus now, right? That's what we are supposed to be doing. So when someone is in China and they are being oppressed, all right, that group can form a grassroots organization that can actually invest in something that's being built in the US and have some sort of a way of freedom of wealth to be able to build their own narrative and their own story and wealth for themselves and to be free, right? So to do that, we need something called consensus building. But the one thing that speaks the same language is money, right? So now a person in Africa can be poor, but they can reach consensus with another person in the United States because consensus building does not really require anything. So you can just be like, okay, I'm doing this thing. You have money, you can buy it if you want, or invest in it with a token through a smart contract, right? So blockchain allowed for this to happen. So we shouldn't forget that the goal of this whole thing is someone is providing value and someone is going to buy into it, whether to invest in it or whatnot. So it would take time. But with time, I think there will be some good distribution, and we will not go against what blockchain was supposed to do, which is provide ability for people to have freedom to build wealth for themselves. Because now what I'm seeing is we are creating like one language, and those people in that language are going to basically decide on how governance is going to be, right? And now we are trying to find ways that we can get someone involved, right? And anytime when you do that, there's some sort of like a little bit of like discrimination going on there, because somebody will say, well, I don't think you're that valuable to provide any value to the community, because the place where you come from, there's nothing there. And that can create division. That's just my take.
And to put a term on that, like if we launch with just English and we don't have this more global system, it's going to give the English community a first mover advantage. We've seen that with Eden. Like, think about what kind of advantage we have gotten in this Eden process because it is English. Like, and the other Edens, like, we're trying to support them. They don't have this advantage. I'm really hopeful that they'll get an equal opportunity and be just as successful, but they don't have this hype and this whatever other positive attributes we gained as a first mover in the Eden process. It's also going to happen with ƒractally. So I don't
Maybe
know.
not.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe
with what
not.
you're saying.
But John is here.
John.
Hey, John.
We think, maybe.
Yeah, John's still in bed. So
Well, John, we've been waiting for you because we would like to vote on our proposed changes to some of the bylaws and peace treaty. So if you want, you can signal your intent to vote in the chat. But I think we should move to that, Chris.
Is
Yep.
Chris Satoshi
Nope, I just have a t-shirt.
getting not so subtle message that, oh, it's just a t-shirt. Okay,
It's just a t-shirt.
carry on.
It's yeah.
I
Don't believe everything. you
now
read.
that I just wanted to get that out of the way. I was starting to get concerned.
We're all
Good
Satoshi.
morning,
Isn't that
John.
the
What
line?
time is it? Yeah, I am Satoshi. It's like an I am Spartacus moment. John, what time is it there?
it's like 7:24, but not a late couple nights doing stuff.
Partying. Oh,
Probably partying with the code, I'm guessing.
Okay, I can talk through these. So the first one is, so in terms of the ejection of Eden from the hands of the Clarion team, the question of who the active permissions, how those are handed from chief delegates to chief delegates. So though I have it written, as part of the election process, the winning chief delegates will have their Eden account keys replace the current active keys. Threshold 2/3+1 required for account transactions. So ideally it's programmatic, and once the election concludes, it would just automatically update. But worst case scenario, it just could be manually done and signed by the seating chief delegates to move the account permissions to the new chief delegates. What do you guys think on that?
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I'm trying to think if there's a different way to do it. My massive, not a massive concern, but my concern, and this could be unfounded, is that if it is active permissions, that like some group of chief delegates could just like take the treasury at that point. And if that's acceptable, then okay, let's go this route. The other option could be to give the delegates a more restrictive set of permissions instead of just blanketing active, and then it creates a protection for that. And maybe I'm being overly protective, but I figured I would just bring that up.
Who gets the other set of, who gets the more restrictive permissions will be the question.
Well, the BPs have the owner permission right now. So, I mean, if we actually wanted to do something today without that permission and we couldn't get that permission, I'm pretty confident we could approach the BPs either directly or through the ENF and be like, hey, we need this thing to happen. We propose the MSIG, they approve it, and it happens. Like, that would be a little bit more of a hassle, but it's not impossible. I don't think that we would get like blocked necessarily. We might get blocked if we're like, hey, we want to send all this money to Binance with this memo. Like, they might question us. And maybe that's a good protection to have, but I don't know. That's kind of where I'm back and forth right now. It's like we could go full bore, CDs, get full permission over the account, and then in the future, it's up to whoever's elected.
I kind of like that just because that's the whole point, is trusting this process. And the only way we're going to really truly test the process is by having a honeypot. And
True.
right? I don't know.
That's true. I guess that may limit the size of the treasury that the network would be willing to give us.
Yep.
Like, they're not going to put like 5 million EOS in the treasury because that's a bigger honeypot. But yeah,
But the longer we have this honeypot and it doesn't get stolen, the better chance we have of getting more as well. Like, it kind of it does go both ways.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think there's options in between if we do get pushback for whatever reason about wanting the CDs to have active permission. But maybe you're right. Maybe we give the CDs active permission, and then it effectively does serve as a honeypot. And if 5 or how many ever are required to sign the permission, like if a malicious group of CDs can get elected and take the treasury, then that proves that this process failed.
Yep.
Doesn't it seem like that would be incredibly unlikely for like,
I don't know,
2/3 + 1 of all chief delegates to be like, guys, I mean, I guess it depends, like as the money goes up.
Yeah. There was $10 million in there. Do you think that they could coordinate a large enough group of people with good enough stories and build up enough reputation to get those tens of millions of dollars or whatever's in the honeypot?
Oh,
like,
it's not right. Okay.
Social engineering could potentially
You look at it that way.
its way through.
Right.
Especially because we have no way of kicking out members, and there's
Yeah.
that process doesn't exist yet. So we could get captured by a bunch of spam who decide to game it. But there is no $10 million. I mean, yeah, maybe
Right.
EOS pumps hard, then all right, we'll take that as a problem.
Right. That scenario is, I think, unrealistic.
Hey, now, come on, that's fun.
Well,
What scenario?
it does create a scenario where
$10 million treasury scenario.
well,
Hey, man.
if
EOS
the
to 100.
BPs put $1 million or 1 million tokens in and the token price goes to $10, like that's, I don't know how likely that situation is, but that's
I don't think they should
situation
ever
that
put
could
those
occur.
type of tokens in there. I personally, if as a sitting chief delegate now, I wouldn't be asking the BPs for more. I think it's maintain a float would be maybe what I would suggest asking for, is like, can we get top ups that maintain this 250K EOS sort of pool? That would be reasonable, but nothing.
Right.
I think if we maintained a treasury at that level, like this is an acceptable risk, but it's going to, like future CDs, if they ask for a larger treasury, they might get rejected because they're like, well, you have the active keys. We don't know.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, then they propose a bylaw to change it so they can request more dough.
Yeah, true. It's like
So what do you guys
checks and
think?
balances.
All right. So what are the official votes on this on E5?
I'm a yay.
I'm a yay.
I think I could
Sláinte.
probably support it.
We can change our minds.
yeah.
Like none of this is permanent. We're just kind of get it to the line now. And we'll have a more chance of discussion as well before it's final.
Yeah, well, I was wondering about it getting gamed and stuff like that. But then I suppose another risk is 2/3 + 1. So we need 2/3 plus one, so that's like what, five chief delegates to be around to to pass the baton kind of thing, to hand over the permission to the next Eden accounts.
The
It needs
VPs
to
could
be
always
up.
do it too.
So
If the chief delegates, the former chief delegates, were unwilling to do it or couldn't reach consensus to move the process along, like I'm sure that the VPs could step in and change that because they are the owner permission of the
Mhm.
account. So
yeah, but
That-
I don't know. If we have to get the BPs to step in, we fucked up. It's, I don't know.
Is there a more elegant fallback solution?
Is there another way that we can do it? More just smart contract, like, where it's not even up to us. The smart contract just decides it. Surely there's a way to make that happen somehow. I can't picture it, but
I think
there's gotta be a-
that would make, I mean, that would fulfill this intent. So I think part of the bylaw here is to create an intention, and how it actually happens. Yeah, I think there's some room there to try to figure it out. It could be a smart contract that automatically does it as part of the election. Sure, that'd be ideal. I agree. But at least is it like this intention of, do the chief delegates, are we the ones who should have the active permission? That's really the question that we want to try to answer with this bylaw.
Yeah,
John, you were the first
I
one
agree.
to propose your eject. What were you envisioning if not with the active key?
Yeah, that we would have some like a smart contract, enforce it. I don't know, like, yeah, it's going 100% trust on chief delegates. And again, if one chief delegate, I don't know, gets hit by a bus, and then I don't know, for some other reason, another chief delegate, something goes wrong there, like, that's it. Like the Eden-
BPs.
That's why
yeah, BPs, but again, BPs should, it's like last resort.
that'd be a good use of the next level delegates, perhaps, like
Yeah.
a 2/3 plus one vote. Like,
Yeah,
say that chief delegates are, well, yeah, one dies and one goes missing. Like, the next level chief delegates with a 2/3 plus one could be like, we got you. We'll convene an emergency session and I'll vote, essentially. I don't know how that would work technically, but yeah, whether it's a smart contract that's governing a multi-sig is essentially a smart contract. No,
But
So-
for our proposal, sorry. Oh, go ahead, Randall. Go ahead.
so I was going to say that if something bad really happened to a chief delegate, you have to actually have a snap election, because that chief delegate has to be replaced if they cannot do their job. So there shouldn't be at any time that if there are 6, there shouldn't be 6.
Right, because funds are
Well-
going to that chief delegate who may have died, and those
well,
funds are
what's the
now.
minimum? Sorry,
No,
what's the
I'm just
minimum
agreeing with
number of
Randall.
chief delegates? Yeah, what's the minimum number of chief delegates we can have to operate, though? Because theoretically, it could fall below 6 and still be fine. But if it falls below a certain number, then it's not fine, unless the MSIG or whatever is, unchanging and requires 6. Then
Right, that's what it's about. If the smart contract is expecting 6 and a chief
Yeah.
delegate dies, and that account is getting funded, it's just wasting. It's like essentially like burning EOS, which we don't want. We want
No,
the
but
EOS to be used to create value.
But we can
So-
remove
but it
we can remove that chief delegate, right? We can take them off.
No, there's no evict feature in Eden.
We have to come up with
that's
one
another
as
thing we need to
possible.
figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to think about, this is a proposal for the next set of chief delegates. We have to frame it in a way. We don't have time to code new features. Like, this is our proposal for 2 weeks from now. So it's got to be like the
Yeah.
simplest solutions we can think of.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's all about intention. Sorry, I missed the last bit of banter there. I had a phone call, but where do you guys, are we stuck on any key part of the intention of this, which I think is what you're saying, Jesse? We want to do that.
not really. We're just trying to figure out. Well, there's a couple things going on now.
So Randall had suggested that if one of the chief delegates passes away, then there should be a snap election for a new set of chief delegates.
So that we can have the 2/3 plus one.
So that would mean that
So-
Lovejoy's proposal of using the level 1 delegates to 2/3 plus 1 is not necessary because you'd have a snap election instead and get a new set of chief delegates.
This came up in the Telos Foundation bylaw discussions on replacing board members and how do you call new elections and the premise around it. And around replacing board members, what we decided, so first of all, the 2/3 plus 1 was based on active members who are there. So if you had a member resign, that threshold it would change basically. If it's codified, it gets tricky. So now that has to be within the smart contract because it's the active keys are already assigned. So I don't know, like that gets harder. Got some mute. But the other thing was that the sitting board members would replace, they would vote 2/3 plus 1 to replace and bring in a new member. So you wouldn't require a new election from the community because those are elections are a pain in the ass, right? So we don't want to overwhelm people with elections if someone decides to disappear. And the other thing is, what's the definition of being gone? Like, so how do we know someone's dead? Like, we don't live near each other, right? So what happens if someone just took a vacation and they didn't show up and they didn't tell anybody, or they had a family emergency and all of a sudden we lost them and we didn't hear about it? So it's like, there's another part of our bylaws and the Telos Foundation was that you would have to have so many attempts to reach out to somebody on more than one means of communication and over a 1-month period to not receive anything back. Then you would kick them and call them removed from the board and then go through the process of replacing them. So I don't know if we want to get into, that's a lot of what ifs now, right? Now we're getting into a lot of weeds, and those questions are here. If we scroll down and look at some of the items, they're here. Like there's bits about that in here that I've NA'd for now. Special elections, quorum, like a lot of the stuff that we're looking at the Telos Foundation, I don't think we want to get into here. So we want to be wary of that, right? These what ifs.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, but if we do have a problem where a missing CD completely renders inoperable the current situation with being able to replace or move forward, then we
Then we have
need
the
kind of a
BPs.
solution for it.
The BPs are the fallback.
I guess the
You always have
BPs is
5.
the fallback. Yeah.
If you had 6 chief delegates and 1 disappears, you still can get quorum with 5 of 6.
Right.
And 5 of 6 could update the actives to only being then 4 of 5, right?
Right.
Well, the actives could update the actives. So they could still technically, it would be a lot of worst case scenarios to make that not work. And when in doubt, we always are able to fall back to the BPs.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if all BPs get on a plane and it crashes, theoretically,
They still have people who work for them. The BPs don't even have a face.
Chuck,
What are
if
you
you're
talking about?
listening,
There's no humans here.
What if all of the Eden community gets hit by a bus?
Big bus, also known as a meteor.
What if an asteroid hits the Earth?
Yeah.
Well, how are we going to reset the private keys?
All right. So can we vote again on E5?
Mm-hmm.
So
I
yay.
say yeah.
I'm down.
So that's
Randall?
3.
Yeah,
John?
I'm down.
John,
Yeah.
you want to eject us? Vote yay for ejection.
And this will still be up to the next CDs to finalize.
So we
Right,
still have
yeah.
to ratify it. And I've got another line about how we could do that down at the bottom. So we'll get to there in a minute.
But don't blow in the cartridge when you eject it because it's bad for it.
That's how you make the games work, though.
Oh, well, I mean, some people have different theories about that. So I respect that.
John or Aaron, do you
John?
guys, are either of you okay with this as it stands? We can still talk about it. Nothing is
Yeah.
permanent here that we're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
nay to.
All right. So we got it.
John's just like, good morning, John.
Nothing's permanent. That's the wrong green. Is that the one? Yeah. Okay. Let me skip this next one and go straight to the one at the bottom here, which is closer to what we're talking about. So this is define how amendments to the bylaw document can be made. There is something in the current peace treaty about this. So active and proposed set of bylaws are indivisible, single documents. So I've suggested the beginning of the new idea is remove this indivisibility part of the current bylaws. Do not make it a single indivisible document. What I think he would have, okay, so I'll just read this. So remove the indivisibly part of the current bylaws. Sitting chief delegates must agree on via a 2/3 + 1 on any proposed bylaw modifications. That's currently what we're doing now. So we're sitting here, we're proposing new bylaw modifications. Bylaw additions and removals can be individual clauses, which is why we'd remove this individual document piece, or they can be a deliberate collection. So this is where I'm trying, I think the intention of Dan's point here is if you have interdependencies between bylaws and you allow chief delegates to like tweak one little bit of it, it might throw off the intention of like the collection that had interdependencies. So what I'm suggesting then is if a deliberate collection of bylaws, which likely have interdependencies, will be ratified as such, so that future delegates must entirely replace the collection in order to make any modifications. I didn't use proper tone on that one. So the deliberate collection of bylaws should hopefully achieve the intent Dan had initially with the document being an indivisible thing. So does that make sense? Where we could propose a collection of little bylaws that are like a clump, and then they need ratified as a clump. They're identified as a clump, and then future chief delegates can't just change a little piece of it. They have to take out the whole thing and put in something new if that's what they're going to do. So one of them might be maximum like $3 or 3 EOS for your entry fee, right? That is like a single item. It has no interdependency. So that could just be changed. It doesn't like, so right. So that wouldn't require a clump. But for example, if we have something that's clustered where the keys, for example, like if this key transition has another bylaw about what ifs, if a member becomes disappears, we can't find them, and we want the BPs to be involved, there could be like a collection of bylaws that all work together to solve that problem with removing members and adding members or whatever, but you can't just pick and choose. And I think that's what Dan was after here, was preventing this picking and choosing.
Yeah, I think it needs to be rewritten. I think the way you explained it after you read it was much clearer than when you read it. But I agree.
I'm totally down with rewriting any of this shit. No problem. Oh, the other thing I have here that I think is important is bylaw changes. They have to be presented 3 months before the next election. I'm saying 7 days, or suggesting 7 days. So bylaw changes may only be ratified if they are proposed at least 7 days prior to an election. That gives us 2 more weeks to work on this. And if there's elections every 3 months, then obviously we can't go with the original proposal here of 3 months because that won't work.
Maybe instead of a set number of days, it is a set portion of the duration between elections. So if we're doing like a 3-month cycle, if we said it was this, I know this gets confusing, but if it was 75% of the way through it, what's that? 3 months, we could just say that's 12 weeks. So you'd have 3 weeks before the election if it was a 3-month cycle. And if it was a 1-month cycle, you'd only have 7 days. I don't know if that helps at all, but it might be a way to write that rule so that way it can work no matter how long the election cycles are, since we are trending towards shorter cycles.
It's a good
I'm okay
point.
leaving it at 7, but I was just thinking about a way to improve it.
And also, Chris, because we're just proposing this, we can do it on the last day. This is not ratified for our term.
It's not. Ideally, what I think would be cool is if we got Dan to use his God powers, and we don't need to. I know this is totally unnecessary, but if we really want to letter by letter follow the current bylaws, because it does say 3 months here, like that is this is included in the current peace treaty. We've agreed to this, so we kind of need that to be even changed in order, if we're really just trying to letter of the law, our internal law, follow this. Even what we're doing now won't work. So I'm kind of hoping that we could say, hey, Dan, can you just stamp this and be like, hey, everyone, I'm going to change that using my God power here. You now can propose within 7 days. Maybe it's unnecessary, I know, but it would make it perfectly accurate if we did it that way.
All right. I mean, that's another point. But I'd say let's try to get as much votes as we can right now.
Chris, I'm wondering if we can make some changes here.
Yes.
You see how it says sitting chief delegates? Why is it that it cannot be all the delegates? Because I think that will be better in terms of like preventing bunch of chief delegates from changing all the bylaws to suit them.
They can't though. Like they can only propose it. The whole idea there is that it requires a subsequent election of chief delegates to ratify.
Yeah, to approve it.
Yeah.
But okay. I got it. But I was just trying to see if we can get more delegates involved so that the community will feel like, okay, they were a little bit involved in the whole process.
Randall, can you imagine what we're doing
They will
right
be.
now with all the delegates and getting a 2/3 plus 1?
Yeah, but they will be involved, Randall, because that's the thing, right? The idea here is if we were to take this as is, we would present these changes. And my suggestion is we take the current bylaws, these bylaws, and make one single document, things that are clumped, like bylaw clumps versus individual line item clumps, one thing, and say, hey, community, the election's in 8 days. Here it is, here in Eden community. Here's the set of bylaws we're looking to have ratified. Please, if you're going to run in the election now, speak to this. Are you going to ratify this or not? Because that's where the community gets to pick exactly what you want. They do it through the election. And if people come up and be like, no, I'm not ratifying that, that's bullshit, and everyone agrees that was bullshit, then that person moves forward, or those people move forward, and it's bullshit. They don't ratify it.
Okay, got it.
So you guys want to talk to Dan real quick? I think I got his attention. We could run some of this shit by him.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
Hold on a second while I get him the link. And you can ask about his God powers.
Maybe we will ask him if ƒractally is going to be running the elections.
Yeah, cue your questions.
Yeah.
While I try to make.
John, do you have any
devices.
thoughts about this? I know I saw your facial expressions. It was mixed.
Yeah, I haven't comprehended the collection thingy. That's lost me.
Well, the idea is, what was Dan's intention here? I guess that's what I was going after. When he says the active and proposed set of bylaws are indivisible single documents. So, and he even gives an example, i.e. the former board cannot provide the next board with numerous options. So I'm wondering, what was his point? My thought was that it must be because some bylaws could have interdependencies. And then if you allow them to just tweak little bits here and there, you can remove the overall intention that was behind some of the bylaws. But maybe I'm great. If he's going to join, then he can explain what he meant there.
Yeah, maybe it's just like typically in programming as well, you don't always just mutate the old document, you just create a brand new, thing. That way there's no, because otherwise if you got like the original bylaws and then you say, this is the amendment document, and then you change something and then you have like 5 amendment documents, eventually you're going to get to a point where one amendment conflicts with another amendment and you're not sure what the original intent was. Maybe you just wanted, every bylaw change just creates a brand new bylaws documents, and then stuff like that doesn't happen maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense. The risk is, of course, we do a whole new document and one little item in there doesn't pass with the next chief delegates. So then the whole set of changes get thrown out because one little bit they didn't like. Like instead of 3 EOS, they think it should be 10. They're like, no, fuck it. We're not doing it. It should be 10, or it should be 0.
It seems like
And
it seems like at that point, it's like we're not computer programs. It seems like at that point, with like intent of code as law perspective on things, you would be able to be like, oh, oops, there was this one unintended consequence of what we propose that changes this other thing that's a dependency. So now we need to come to a new, agreement on what that is. It's like,
I think that was, but it's also by design, because now if we were to propose a document, we really have to think, hey, let's not go too far with this. Like it's got to be, passed by, them entirely. So you can't make some crazy changes. It's got to be like very incremental. It keeps it more stable. That might have been a bit of, by design. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious to know. For me, the interdependencies thing made the most sense because I could see how you would make rules, but they don't work if you change one of them, like in a sequence. So that's why I was saying if we recognize that, then we propose here's a clump of bylaw rules that you can't tweak individually. You have to remove the whole thing if you're going to and replace it with something else. And
Welcome, Dan.
Hello.
Hey,
How
Dan.
you guys doing?
Good, we're deep in it, discussing the changes and how that might work. We have questions for you.
All right.
Yeah.
This
So
is
one
a
of the
re-
ones, oh, go ahead, Dan.
This is a recorded call.
It's recorded.
Yeah.
Good. So what's going on?
So, okay, we're looking at bylaw changes or proposed bylaw changes that will be ideally ratified by the next set of chief delegates. So there's a couple questions. One of them that we first got to was bylaws. So we're going off that. So there's a comparison of the current agreed peace treaty versus some suggested changes. Current peace treaty right now has that bylaws can only be ratified if they were proposed at least 3 months prior to the last election. We're obviously not going to be able to do that based on the current timelines. So one of the requests that I have, because I'd like to adhere to this peace treaty as close as we can without just saying, fuck it, we'll just do it anyway. You have God powers, so to speak, over the current peace treaty. Could we, well, the suggestion is that we create a new set and then we ask you to use your God power to change at least, well, there's 2 bits that I'm suggesting you could change. That 3-month period, because we're not going to hit it. So shorten it. The suggestion I have here is that they proposed 7 days prior to the next election, which isn't a lot of time. But if elections are going to be every 3 months, potentially every month, then we would want to make this number shorter. So whatever number we arrive on, if you could then make a God power change, so then we could be within quorum and or at least within what the peace treaty currently has.
So for ƒractally, the equivalent of bylaws is the council proposing a change to the smart contract. And it's set up so that there's at least 2 weekly meetings between the time it's proposed and the time it becomes ratified, during which it can be vetoed. So I think if we go with the same thing, say make it 15 days, that would be enough for it to have at least one day before, or something like that.
But that's a big difference between proposing one chief sets proposes and the next set ratifies. But I think you were saying that the current set could ratify.
On ƒractally, the council can propose, and there's just a waiting period during which the teams can change out the people, they can retract it, or it can be vetoed by the next election, which is by having veto power at the next election is equivalent to, I guess, maybe not an active approval, but it's an active disapproval. So that the entire body of the organization has an opportunity to put people in place to change or prevent it from taking effect. So that's same general spirit of anytime there's system-wide changes, there should be a consensus building process, that the meetings are the consensus building process, and it can only take effect if that consensus building process approves it. Now I made it passive so that if it gets, you have to have active resistance in order to prevent it from happening instead of having active approval of the system-wide changes. But that's, it could go either way with Eden.
Okay. So the preference there would be 15 days or
14 or 15 days,
14
something like that.
days.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? It would give us enough time to basically finish up our review and proposal by the next meeting. And then that would give just enough time if we finish this for next Thursday. Okay.
Makes sense to me.
Are we also going to adopt the passive active thing, because I think what Dan suggested is that we propose something and by default it's going to be in, it has to be vetoed before it actually doesn't.
Well, let's
I don't
run
know.
everything by Dan.
The new chief delegates would have to act to veto it if they don't want it, versus having to act to approve it.
And that
Okay.
itself would need to be put into the bylaws as well.
All right, and that's another question then. It's this comment about an active and proposed set of bylaws are an indivisible single documents. So are indivisible. So is that because there's concern that certain bylaws will have interdependencies on other bylaws? And therefore, if chief delegates decide to tweak little bits, they will kind of remove the intention of these interdependencies? Or is there more to it than that?
It was more to prevent is try to actually limit the size of the entire body of bylaws. If you piecemeal things together, then next thing you know, you're ratifying something huge. And it kind of forces you to like always consider the whole thing in its entirety. And if it starts getting too long, then maybe it's literally too long. Now, another perspective on that is the smart contract that governs the system is an embodiment of the objective bylaws, as opposed to the subjective bylaws, which are enforced by the community and through their multi-sig. Otherwise, you have to keep track of what is the current set of all ratified bylaws. It kind of keeps one thing at a time, so that people can't, I guess, line item veto, where there's like 3 different things, and they pick 2 out of the 3, and that completely changes the meaning of the system.
That was my comment. That was my thought. So I was suggesting that bylaws, like removing this idea of an indivisible single document, but when bylaw changes are made, the chief delegates can either make individual line items, like individual changes. For example, the entrance fee being 3 EOS. That has no other interdependencies. It could, if the next chief delegate's like, no, it should be 100, or no, it should be 0. That really, there's nothing else dependent on that, really. But if certain bylaws had,
let's talk about I guess the difference between bylaws and settings. So you have a smart contract and it has settings like the fee, and as long as the chief delegates multi-sig approve, we can allow the chief delegates to change settings, which is different than changing bylaws, as long as you change it within the range, right? So let's say the fee can be between half an EOS and 10 EOS. That's the configurable range that the chief delegates have authority to do unilaterally at any time. And it's a bylaw change if you want to change the range outside of that. And so things like kicking people out or whatnot can be a multi-sig. So as we add actions that are done with the chief delegate authority, those things are not bylaw changes. They're just delegated powers, I guess, at that point.
interesting. So things that shouldn't be in a bylaw, because bylaws become sort of the rules that you're going to operate within, but you're suggesting there should be an explicit differentiation between settings and parameters versus the subjective soft stuff.
Yeah, but I wonder if there's another example of a bylaw that has no other dependencies that could be viewed as like a line item thing that you're talking about, Chris.
Okay. Here's a line item bylaw. You must be dressed when you're appearing on the Zoom calls. Okay.
Damn.
That doesn't impact anything else. If but now so you have 20 different bylaws, all this. All right. In addition to that, you must wear the color green and a hat.
Yeah.
And if you don't wear the color green in a hat, or you say, how do you get all the bylaws with respect to appearing on a video call put in one spot? And so that people can actually find things. If you look at how our government's gotten out of whack in the United States, they just add things onto the registrar and they amend and whatnot. In order to figure out what the law is, you've got to apply a get diff kind of stuff, only without the tooling. And then you have to cross-reference meanings, and then it's all in conflict, right? And they don't bother resolving the conflicts. And then no one actually knows what the rules are. And then you have disputes over all the rules. I guess there was, at one point I was considering bylaws along the lines of somebody has to memorize the entire thing and recite it. And
If you can't, then yeah.
if you can't memorize and recite it, then you can't vote for it. And we'll know if we use the teleprompter. Next thing you know, the bylaws start looking like songs with rhyming and rhythm.
That'd be pretty fun.
But all these things are attempts to put limits like proof of work that force trade-offs, right? Instead of saying, well, we'll just add a new bylaw, we'll just more complexity, right? That's the tendency of laws and organizations and whatnot until it eventually collapses under its own complexity. And then there's things that you can never go back and touch. So I try to identify like the peace treaty is kind of like the meta rules that are the invariants, like no matter what, you can't change the block size. But anything within the block is fair game. Those are some of the concepts I was looking at. And the problem I ran into as I was working on bylaws for a while before getting into the ƒractally process. It's really, really challenging to separate what goes in the peace treaty and what goes in the bylaws because they're interreferential. Who has the authority? Like defining a member, right? Who are the members that get to vote? And if you can define the members, the peace treaty defines it, but then the bylaws define the process for evicting members out. All of a sudden, like the higher level thing loses all meaning. So it's really, I found it to be really difficult to separate out the concept of peace treaty from bylaws, of the immutable things from the mutable things. Because in effect, if people can reach consensus, they can change anything, always, at all times. And it's just whether or not there's, even the Bitcoin blockchain in theory could be changed, block size could be changed if people could reach consensus.
Okay.
I guess my point is it comes down to speed. What speed and the ability of the people to review and reach consensus. If you have incumbents and they can change it willy-nilly and the people don't get a chance to review it, that's a problem. And so ƒractally's approach is, anything is fair game. It's in the smart contract and any bylaws are fair game. There's this review process that says how long certain things take before they take effect. And otherwise, there's just various time delays depending on the sensitivity. And those time delays are configured by the longer time delay, which is like 2 weeks. And in theory, it's always recoverable because as long as you don't change things in a way that prevents people from reaching an alternative consensus, like saying, and the chief delegates from forever on will be these 6 people, then the people can have an election and change it. And worst case scenario, in a true DAO, the people just fork out the 6 chief delegates that usurped the will of the people. and they go about their business, which is why fractals have their own tokens. But since Eden is effectively an organization managing a bucket of EOS, it's not possible to fork EOS. It's not possible to fork Eden. And therefore, I guess you have to be a little bit more intelligent or careful not to allow the chief delegates to change the smart contract in a way that keeps themselves power.
Right.
So yeah, Dan, that was something that we were talking about earlier about the chief delegates getting the active key. It sounds like what you were just saying, that you wouldn't support something like that. Do you want to speak up about that?
I would have a proposal process, like a multi-sig process that will work for everything except set codes. Set codes would require, well, it'd even work with set codes, it just require a longer delay, would be the way I'd set it up.
What does that mean?
Set codes allows us to update the contract.
So there'd be an action to the contract, which is propose set code. All the chief delegates would approve it. And it'd have to sit there for a period of time. And then the chief delegates might change, and the new chief delegates could come along and unapprove it. And then the set code never happens. But after some sufficient amount of time without it being unapproved, anyone can execute the exec call, which will deploy the code. And so it's not and otherwise you could propose any transaction for Eden. The chief delegates can ratify it, and presto, it's done. I think initially giving the chief delegates multi-sig works. The process would have to ensure that there's at least six chief delegates, and probably at least a certain number of rows. So election turnout is going to impact the security of the system. One of the things that we did is we randomly used sortition to pick the top head. I think what we're basically saying, we want to get rid of a top head and just have a committee at the top. Seems to be what most people are comfortable with, compared to making Aaron the dictator in chief just by randomness.
Yeah. There was something I wanted to ask in the peace treaty. There's something in there that says 2/3 plus 1 vote of all members to make changes to the peace treaty. But with the rational ignorance of some of the members in Eden, I'm wondering if that still makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, and that's why that doesn't exist in ƒractally. That was a way of saying it's not immutable, but practically it is immutable. It was the intention of that line, because I knew that practically it never happened. But that's not it's more as long as the entire body has the opportunity to review and reach consensus on it in the meetings, right?
Mhm.
Then you don't have to get 2/3. You get 2/3 of all the groups, right? And then you get the chief delegates, and if the chief delegates then multi-sig, well, you've effectively got 2/3 of the people directly approving it. When they selected their representatives, knowing their opinion on whether or not to ratify something. So I would just say the chief delegates can do anything as long as they're is an election between when they propose it and when it goes live. And then there's a 2 weeks, right? So as long as they propose it 2 weeks before an election, so that people have an opportunity to get educated, the ones who care. And then when they show up in their groups, they can pitch their concerns about it if they want to overthrow the current chief delegates.
So yeah, that makes sense. Dan, can we go back to the indivisibility discussion? Sorry.
Can we finish this one that we jumped from first, the set code one? I just want to see if we have agreement on that.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll go back down. So Dan, in general, are you okay with the idea of, because right now the active keys sit with the Clarion team. So, and I think this is already approved. I just want to confirm, are you okay with the Clarion team transferring active permissions to chief delegates, whether it's us or the next ones?
Yes, I'm okay transferring the active keys to someone who wants to maintain it.
Okay. And then this set code thing I think is interesting. So right now, the way we had it written and we all agreed was that as part of the election process, the winning chief delegates will have their Eden accounts replace the current active keys threshold of 2/3 + 1 required for account transactions. We should add then a clause about a time delay on set code actions, delay to be the period between elections. So that way, if we're going to set code, another election will need to take place where the next CDs will have an opportunity to veto that. Is that essentially a good way for that intent to prevent quick changes?
Yes, that's the direction I would like to see this go. That said, Eden is necessarily evolving, and we'll probably want to do set codes multiple times between cycles. And I think it makes sense for now to allow the Eden process to be centralized, right? In some sense, the active keys have the ability to take all the money. That's the one thing to consider. They also have the ability to fix things if there's an urgent need. So, yeah, I guess the block producers also have the ability to fix things if there's an urgent need that goes faster. But I don't want to rely on block producers because that's a whole nother can of worms and coordination.
So this set code then would not allow the ability to fix things urgently then. Is that fair? If it's a code fix that's required?
Yeah, so I guess my preference is right now, while it's in rapid iteration, we use this, you have the ability to do it instantly, but that should only be used for emergency situations and to, I guess, fix bugs and or evolve the process while it's still being iterated on, with the intention of whenever possible, the big changes, the things that fundamentally transform Eden take place with this delay so that there's an election between when it's proposed and when it's executed. And you know, like I've said this with ƒractally, it's about people first, and the code are just tools. And the people are either going to be honorable or they're not. And so the most important thing is figuring out who the membership is. Membership is all invite only and things like that. The process filters out pretty well the best of the best. So I think we just need to trust people a little bit until we can get a robust, make the process more and more robust so that less and less things have to be trusted to a core group of people for efficiency's sakes.
Yeah, the idea that the chief delegates with the active keys could pull all the funds, they could collude and do it. We did talk about that. and we talked, the idea if the honeypot was so big and, EOS to 100, then maybe it gets something that might actually happen. But then again, we want to test this process, right? That's the only way we're really going to see how this thing handles when there is a honeypot that's worth trying to capture. So it's like,
Yeah,
do we let them have it or not?
The process is to select people you can trust.
Yeah.
And if it selects people that can't be trusted, then that's a problem with the membership, not necessarily a problem with the process.
The process that allows members to join or not join is really right. The process, like you say, but we don't have a means yet to necessarily kick people, or the language issue and all these things about curating the membership.
Yeah, I would say that the chief delegate should have the power to kick people initially. That's the minimum. Chief delegates have the ability to change the code. They can kick people. And if you need to do that, now what does that mean? If you abuse the power to kick everyone who doesn't support you, now you retain power, right? So
Purge the voter rolls. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be a more simple code change. This evict function that we've been talking about, we could just be used in the set code action, and that can be done simply. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you have the code to evict it, and there'll be an action that requires the active authority of the chief delegates or of the account, and then if active authority says it, then it's done. They're evicted. So it's it's a relatively small thing. From a smart contract perspective, getting the UI and coordinating people and rallying the chief delegates to deal with someone who's clearly corrupt. But if people believe the process is fair, all the videos are recorded, everyone sees what's going on, I think you'll have lots of accountability, real reputation on the line. So I think the whole thing should work relatively well. We're doing all the ƒractally meetings on Google Sheets. So yeah, it's possible to do all this manually and get effectively the same results.
I don't know if we're at a good point to change topics a little bit, but John mentioned in the chat.
Jesse had one.
Yeah, so we need a clear answer on the indivisibility of the
bylaws themselves.
Yeah.
After talking to Dan, I'm okay with the idea of keeping it as one thing. And I think what I had said when I had rewritten this little bit down here, Dan, and I had said the idea that when we propose bylaws, remove the fact that it has to be one document. Bylaws could be individual lines that could be individually edited. However, if the chief delegates propose a clump of bylaws, because there's interdependencies, they're defined as such. And therefore, if they're to be changed later, they have to be changed in entirety. So that's sort of, because I thought it was about interdependency when you had this. And so I was trying to make it a little more flexible. But I like the idea of having, because the idea of having just this creep of bylaw where all of a sudden we end up this huge thing, that can happen if we don't have this indivisibility rule. So I kind of see that aspect as well. So my mind has been changed on that.
Yeah, I'm good with that too. All right, go ahead, Lovejoy.
Well, John brought it up in the comments, which is another thing to talk about. What happens on sudden death or resignation of a sitting chief delegate? We were talking about this earlier, and the only recourse we seem to be able to reach is that without changing the code and changing a lot of things, we have the BPs to rely on, but that's suboptimal in many ways. But yeah, if a chief delegate dies and another one goes off to Mexico and doesn't respond to calls, like, we have a problem. What do you
It just
think?
means no changes will occur until the next election.
Yeah, but then we're kind of wasting funds on this person who may have died. It's essentially like burning EOS if he's not able to recover his account.
his
Well, until they
account-
claim it. Go
the
ahead, Dan.
way, yeah, until they claim it, it's still community funds. And if they die, the community can reach consensus on how to reallocate it. I was already of the opinion that we're just reallocating budgets, and until the budget is spent, that's like saying you have an employee dies and he's got a budget to pay things, but he never spent the budget. Company reclaims it. So until you withdraw it to your personal EOS account, it's community funds.
Got it.
So in terms of decisions needed by majority of chief delegates, you propose the most elegant solution is just waiting till the next election? Should there be an absence of chief delegates?
Yeah,
Or is there another way?
I heard through the grapevine, you guys are talking about changing the elections to every couple months.
3 months.
Every 3
Yeah.
months. So, yeah, you're unlikely to lose 2 people in 3 months. You'd actually lose 3 to deadlock, assuming you can continue to maintain 6 chief delegates.
Is there a way to create a flexible system where it's just 2/3 plus 1 of like living chief delegates versus,
Well,
a static 6 max count?
in theory, that would allow, how do you prove someone's dead? A really long time delay?
Yeah, they have a heartbeat action that you got to hit every 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah. But think about it. How did some of the other DAOs get hacked? Somebody proposed something while no one was paying attention. And it automatically got ratified because there were no votes against it. And then they stole all the money. So don't create systems that have a failure mode of if people aren't paying attention, then things go through. I critiqued the other DAO platform on their consensus algorithm, which is anyone can propose anything and it will go through unless it's disputed, right? And the idea is that there's no economic incentive for people to review all proposals, because if they're all good, then you're not getting any bounty for finding the good ones. And if they're bad, you have to get enough payment on the one bad one to cover all the good ones you reviewed. And so no one's going to have incentive to make that their job. And then someone will intentionally put a bad one in there to just get a bounty if you try to make a really big bounty for finding it, right? And so there's all kinds of problems with the completely passive approach if you allow single parties or untrusted groups to propose actions.
Not to mention it creates an incentive to bump off other chief delegates. So you can.
That's funny.
I mean, honeypot, it's real. All right, cool. What other questions do we have for Dan while we have him?
Yeah, I have a
Chris,
question.
did you have any?
Dan, so moving forward, who's going to be running the Eden elections? Is ƒractally team willing to run the elections for a contract, or how's that going to be?
We're continuing to host the app, and so it's going to happen automatically. The main thing for the elections is I guess there's a little bit of hosting in terms of the DJing the video conference at the beginning, introducing everyone, and then reporting on what's going on. We've gotten pretty good at doing this every single week. 3 weeks in a row, we've we've effectively had a one level Eden election in ƒractally groups. So now we're obviously we're not allocating funds that are liquid on chain, which is different, but it's not that much work for someone to facilitate the election. So the ƒractally team will facilitate this next election so that we can get you guys another 6 months to continue to get organized. And if there's more funding coming in from E&F, then I think that we can really start to see this evolve. My advice to the chief delegates and Eden in general is to make sure that the Eden organization is a top priority for investing the funds in improving the organization, instead of taking all the money and trying to spend it elsewhere and then not having any money left over to enhance Eden itself. The original plan was E&F was going to be paying Clarianos at the time, now ƒractally, to build and enhance the Eden process, and then the funds that go to Eden would be going to everyone else. It seems that the community does not want to fund for the ƒractally, for the development of ƒractally itself, which is basically saying you don't want to fund for the development of Eden, because ƒractally is where I think Eden should be going. And the white paper is what I put forward on how to make this whole process scale better and be more fun and be more flexible and dynamic. But since the community doesn't want to fund us to build it, Eden has no choice but to use the funds it does have to make sure that it can survive as an organization, and it will have overhead, right? So some percentage of the funds that go to any foundation or charity go to overhead, and then some portion of it goes out to whatever public goods the organization is set up to do. And I think that that's one of the things the Eden community is going to have to look at this upcoming election, is what percentage of funds need to be directed toward enhancing the Eden process versus what percentage of funds are going to be directed toward the broader EOS ecosystem. Recognizing that the more you invest in improving the process, the more efficiently you can allocate funds to the broader ecosystem in the future. And the more funds the ecosystem can trust Eden with. So there's a balance there. That would be, that's the main difference between the last election and this election, is we were operating under the impression that E&F was going to be funding us to build it, but now that's not happening.
I totally agree with that. Is actually one of the points prior to you joining, Dan, that I was going to get to. One of my blue boxes here. Last meeting, we discussed that we would be nerfing the spread between the head chief and the chief delegates. So we were going to reduce that jump. And we had come to agreement that the head chief would only receive 1.5x what a regular chief would get. And that remainder would go back across the rest of the regular chiefs. And that would be the end of it. My suggestion was what you've just sort of hinted at. Is there room for a pool of funds that functions as core funding that the chief delegates have spending authority via 2/3+1? So instead of reducing the current head chief so much and giving it to the CDs, can we take some of that and put it into a separate pool that the chiefs can then use to spend as this core funding to help with the org piece, right? Whether that's paying for elections, paying for smart contract upgrades, it's how much that is to be determined. But anyway, so I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to.
You already have multi-sig over the entire contract. So you already have a pool of funds, which is the entire budget of the community.
Yeah. I like the 5% thing. If we start dipping into that and we set a precedent that chief delegates can just sort of start chomping away at that one, that kind of changes the context with which the BPs had originally donated to Eden and given those funds. So I'm personally wary of that.
Well, they
Also-
originally didn't intend there to be a 5% rule. I put the 5% rule because I was afraid that the block producers would be flaky with their willingness to fund, and I didn't want the community to
I
suffer.
wouldn't operate on the assumption that there is no additional funding external of the Eden budget to build minor things for Eden. We've been approached multiple times asking what we need funding for by the ENF, and if we had a small ask for development, I wouldn't assume that the answer is no. I mean, there's a huge difference between wanting to build ƒractally for like millions of dollars and improving Eden for like 50 grand or something. So we could still ask if there is an ask. I just say all of this in that I would not assume the answer is no.
The way I would suggest this work is, now you use the budget that they've already given you to self-fund the things that need to be done. And then you ask ENF for a bigger budget. And if they like how the things that you're self-funding on, then that's good.
True.
And that way there doesn't need to be ENF pays for the development of Eden on the side, and then Eden, it can all just be ENF gives Eden a budget, Eden has to balance it all out. And if they do a good job and ENF likes that you spent $50,000 improving this part of the UI in Eden, and you spent X doing something for EOS, great.
Yep.
I think that makes a
There's a
lot
couple
of
options.
sense. Yep.
Hey, Dan, I've been thinking about ƒractally on EOS and getting EOS to fund ƒractally. And I think there's still a chance if we come up with some ideas that address the parties interested. And so you had spoke about in your interview with Helios, the challenge with EOS is the multiple languages and whether to start with one prime fractal versus potentially multiple prime fractals. And so with EOS-Bs, we essentially kind of have like multiple fractals of different languages. And the way that we decide to allocate funding to those different hives is using objective metrics. And so I've been thinking of 3 prime fractals of English, Korean, and Chinese. In the beginning, they split the inflation evenly. But if we can come up with an objective metrics to modify the allocation of inflation to those fractals, then maybe that can work. So let me just, what?
It's very truly objective measure. You might call them objective, but they're ultimately all subjective, and someone has to
Sure.
figure it out.
So this concept of the mutual respect, if we're able to track, like if the English MRs, the Korean, or vice versa, then the more MR one fractal has, the more inflation they would get. And then if there's a fractal that doesn't have any MR, they would get less inflation. So that was just an idea, but if we can think of some metric, I think it may work.
The way it would work is the EOS community, the block producers, determine which fractals they want to subsidize, and then the fractals themselves cross-subsidize each other, right? So maybe EOS subsidizes the English fractal, and the English fractal gives the mutual respect to the Korean and the Chinese by subsidizing. And if that works, then it might not be entirely necessary for EOS to directly subsidize the other ones. But if they chose to, then they could directly subsidize. And then the Chinese and Koreans could subsidize the English ones, right? And so it kind of like creates this mesh where we're all kind of respecting each other. And then ENF and the block producers are kind of the deciders at the root level which ones they want to subsidize. And that's the status quo right now. The thing that's necessary for ƒractally to really operate on the network EOS network is to actually get to the point where the network is governed in a fractal manner with some type of way that prevents incumbents from actually controlling the network. And as it stands right now, everything is stake weighted, and stake doesn't change very frequently, and it's largely in the hands of exchanges. The incumbents that be are difficult to change, right? E&F is just a company. It's like the Federal Reserve. They just chose a name that's EOS Network Foundation, but they're just another company that happens to have the direct support of the block producers. And so I look carefully at how do we get it to the point that the EOS network is actually in the hands of the people, and it's possible to make changes and to reach an alternative consensus from what it is. I think that it'd be easier to make changes if EOS was entirely Chinese or entirely Korean, because those communities can talk to each other. And I think that's because it's hybrid, and most of the money seems to be in Asia, and a lot of the dev happens to be English. And then there's mistrust, right? And I'm not saying there's any bad actors here. It's just there's mistrust and lack formed from the lack of communication. But a sizable number of Chinese actually do speak English. I think it's entirely possible to have the Chinese participate in an English-speaking system, and you pick a time zone that's kind of, you do the elections at a time that's kind of works for both. And that works. Far more Chinese speak English than English speak Chinese. So I think that's, maybe I might be wrong, but I'm just guessing. That might be because the compromise is speak English, but on a Chinese time zone. Yeah, something like that.
Dan, in regards to the BPs, Zach Gall and the Fireside Chat suggested a stepped approach where you go, one BP to 2 with certain time periods approved by the ENF. Would you be open to something like that?
Yeah, and it's really easy to start, is to allow the chief delegates to appoint a single block producer. You don't need all of ƒractally in order to start moving in the direction of block producers that are selected by the community. And the code change necessary to allow chief delegates to appoint a block producer is relatively minor.
Yeah, I like that idea. That was when I first saw the proposal of, which I'm actually not a super fan of. I will admit, I don't like the idea of having DPOS doing this for a cluster and then this subjective group just picking the other BPs. I like the idea of where the fractals, the council could be like the OIG in WAX, where they don't pick the individual BPs, but they vet them. They have relationships with them. They remove the sock puppets via this relationship, and they create then a menu of BPs that then DPOS does its thing. And at least then you have this overlap between the two systems versus two systems kind of running independent.
So effectively give the chief delegates veto power. It says you are not a block producer, and then DPOS picks the rest. Fully executed, you could directly choose the BPs by picking exactly 21 and vetoing everyone else. And it doesn't matter who DPOS votes at that point. But I suppose you could say that the problem is there's an infinite number of sock puppets that you could potentially have to veto. So it's a challenge. Another option is to have synthetic stake, give Eden voting weight equal to an exchange or two. And then you can start throwing that around as a way of having influence in DPOS disproportional to your stake, but not entirely selecting it. And then that synthetic weight can be adjusted.
Can you, I don't understand that, Dan. Can you try to explain that again?
With block producers are just an algorithm where you sum all the stake weight that's voting for them, and then you sort it. and they take the top 21. So these are just numbers that are being added up. It's possible to say that the Eden account has the weight of 100 million EOS. And then they can throw that around and sort of set the base, right? These are all the ones that we approve, and they pick 30 that they just give 100 and then the rest of the network goes and they do whatever they're going to do. You don't control it, but you're a whale, right? The Eden community is a whale, and the whale makes decisions with the chief delegates multi-sig. And yeah, now since the chief delegates are 6 people, you should probably not allow them to, it's not, fractals were growing to 7,000 and they had teams and they had a lot of other things in the checks and balances that made it stronger than Eden chief delegates are. But I would say the principle of given the chief delegates weight without actually having the tokens is one way to solve it. It would be as if someone like Block One Stake was being used to support a proxy and the chief delegates control the proxy.
That was a dream at one point.
You could also, with this idea, apply the same synthetic weight to other Edens of other languages, and then, it's not one, like the English-speaking community making decisions. So it's certainly an interesting idea.
Is this a way we can incrementally approach fractally, the fractally model without, from Eden, and use Eden to bootstrap a more, non-Pareto control of the network, while then sort of
the reality is there's the ideal, what you would do if you were starting from scratch and you had no rules and constraints from the past, and then there's what you can evolve into. And synthetic stake, where Edens are given synthetic stake to help select block producers, might be an easier way to evolve in the direction of balancing out the Pareto distribution of exchanges.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, we have to work with the way things are now, as much as we want to just be able to like flip a switch and change everything. So working with Eden seems to provide some advantages in that regard.
Yeah, this is the more EOS can do to be democratic in nature, to involve more people in the decision-making process, the more trust the broader community will have, and then ultimately the token price will follow that building of trust. And EOS is in a hole because of Block One. But I think Eden combined with ENF can have some real potential there. And then, I'm building out fractally, and we can test that with fractals in parallel. And then people see that work, maybe it'll be easier to convince people to adopt something they can see versus being afraid of something they don't understand.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that someone needs to write a proposal for these steps. And I think the community will respond better to like a detailed proposal.
You would think. I thought my fractally white paper was a pretty detailed proposal, but
no, the content was great. No, that was, but the how to implement it on EOS was not detailed.
True. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, it was like an A and Z without like all the middle parts missing. Like
it's the step 1, 2, 3 question mark profit. Yeah, the question marks.
Right.
The underpants gnomes.
So I really like this approach. I'm glad to see that Eden has become a self-perpetuating organization, and I think it can do good things for the EOS network.
Cool.
That's the
Thanks,
plan.
Dan.
So
We even decided on a mission statement, which was or like a purpose to create value for the EOS ecosystem. Very simple.
So Dan, we're going to write up a bylaw document. And then we're gonna send it to you. You're gonna approve it with your God powers. So then Eden
Ooh.
can move forward.
Not
And so
all
that-
of them. I only think we need Dan to change. I think we should let the next set of chief delegates really they get the ones, I think they should, well, I mean, I don't know. I think they should approve it. The only thing we need you to change, in my opinion, Dan, is just that part about the proposal,
3 months.
the 3 month to
okay.
14 days.
Okay.
Because right now we're going to defy the peace treaty by proposing it where it's not 3 months. So that's the one where
this call is being recorded. I hereby approve it.
okay.
Yay.
14 days, you guys are good with that? In which case we should plan, I think, one more meeting. Like, let's ramp it up, do 2 meetings next week if we can. Let's do some chat, review some more of these bylaw points, talk again maybe Monday, Tuesday, again on Thursday, and that will be we'll hopefully have a final document to present to each other on Thursday to approve, present to the community that adheres to the 14-day threshold.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's
You guys have time?
All right.
yeah, I could do that. Chris,
Awesome.
are you taking the lead of writing
Yes.
this document?
I will, yeah.
Okay, thank
I'm going to marry it with the current peace treaty. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to marry these new bits in, put it in a sensible order, and then we can just review the changes. And I don't think we want to pile on too much more here. I think some of these big bullets we have are pretty good steps towards a better, anyway, iterative process that at least
An
the next
incremental
one's gonna be.
improvement, right? You never know exactly what you have to move in the right direction, and then you
Right.
learn.
That's the
Baby
plan.
steps.
Awesome. Thanks for your support, Dan. Appreciate that change.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. All right.
Out.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, that was
So,
good.
yeah, I got to get going in like 10 minutes.
Yeah, I kind of figured we were wrapping up.
Yeah, I think we had a great call.
It's not been 3 hours. What the hell?
Yeah, seriously.
It's
We got
well,
4 more hours to go to
I
beat
said
the
that at 4
record.
p.m.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna read some Irish blessings for
All right,
the
all right.
occasion. All right. That's a Matthew McConaughey blessing. You're just one all right short. I'll forgive you this time. Anyone have any final thoughts on all this stuff before we get into that? Are
Take it
we
away,
good to
Maestro.
Yeah,
wrap?
go ahead, Lovejoy.
All right, this is just a selection that I came up with during the call. May the roof above us never fall in, and may the friends gathered below it never fall out. And that's a good one. And then this one's kind of dark, but I like it. May those who love us love us, and those that don't love us, may God turn their hearts. And if he doesn't turn their hearts, may he turn their ankles, so we'll know them by their limping. That's pretty brutal.
Is Lovejoy buzzed right now?
I'm a little, I've had like 2 glasses of this already.
I can see it in his eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. May you always have walls for the winds, a roof for the rain, tea beside the fire, laughter to cheer you, those you love near you, and all your heart might desire. And then finally, there are good ships and there are wood ships, the ships that sail the sea, but the best ships are friendships, and may they always be.
You're here.
Well done.
Yeah.
You're not drinking enough. You'd be tearing up now if you're really that drunk, right?
I tear up normally when I'm sober, and maybe like the alcohol's inhibiting my tearing.
My glass is empty, but I don't dare drink anymore right now.
Yeah, it's
I'm
Right,
a
everyone?
lightweight.
not 7 p.m. yet.
We're gonna close it out now. Thank you for joining us. Hope you liked our call, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.
Awesome.
Peace.